Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Prophet Samuel 1, chapter 19 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We are picking up the story at a moment of just extreme tension. Saul's boiling jealousy, it's finally reached a breaking point. What was once this kind of internal, silent envy of David's rising popularity has completely erupted into a full-blown public obsession with eliminating him. We're talking about a king turning all the resources of his throne toward hunting down his most loyal servant. And today, we're going to walk through every thrilling and honestly miraculous detail of exactly how David survives this.
Okay, let's look at our agenda for today so you know exactly where we're heading. We've got 1. Context in Jonathan's loyalty. 2. The spear and the escape. 3. Sanctuary among the prophets. 4. Clarifications and key ideas. 5. Practical life lessons. And finally, 6. A chapter recap. Let's dive right in.
All right, part 1, context and Jonathan's loyalty.
So, looking directly at our source text here, Saul explicitly commands his son Jonathan, along with all his royal attendants, to kill David. He's not hiding it anymore. But there's a massive complication for Saul here. Jonathan is deeply fond of David. They share an incredibly strong bond. So Jonathan immediately jumps into action. He goes straight to David and warns him, saying, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there." And then Jonathan devises this brilliant plan. He tells David to hide in a specific field, and Jonathan promises to walk out into that very field with his father. The idea is he'll bring up the topic of David, gauge Saul's true intentions, and then report back.
Now, notice how Jonathan courageously and really logically defends David here. When they're out in the field, Jonathan speaks incredibly well of his friend. He tells his father, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He hasn't wronged you, and what he has done has actually benefited you greatly." He reminds Saul of the sheer magnitude of David's loyalty. You know, how David literally put his life in his hands when he went out to kill the Philistine, Goliath. Jonathan points out that the Lord won a great victory for all of Israel that day, a victory Saul himself saw and celebrated. So Jonathan's argument is rooted purely in fact and moral clarity. David is innocent, and killing him would just be a terrible, unjustified wrong.
And remarkably, Saul actually listens to reason. The pure logic and conviction of his son break through his paranoia, at least for a moment. Saul swears this temporary oath of peace, declaring, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." Following this solemn promise, Jonathan brings David out of hiding, fills him in on the whole conversation, and brings him back to Saul. So, for a brief period, David is back in the king's presence, serving him exactly as he did before. The tension seems to have miraculously just dissipated.
But it doesn't last long. Let's move to part 2, the spear and the escape. The catalyst for the next crisis is, ironically enough, David's continuing success. War breaks out once again with the Philistines. David goes out to fight, and the text tells us he strikes them with such immense force that the enemy completely flees before him. He secures yet another massive victory for Israel. But those striking victories directly trigger a severe relapse in Saul. The contrast is really stark here. As David rises in triumph, Saul descends into madness. The text explains that an evil or injurious spirit from the Lord comes upon Saul as he's sitting in his house. This phrase basically describes a deep, overwhelming darkness, a severe emotional and spiritual torment that completely overtakes the king.
So, the crucial point here is this incredibly visceral scene. Picture this: David is in the room, peacefully playing the harp, just as he had done so many times in the past to soothe Saul's troubled mind. Saul is sitting there, but this time he has a heavy battle spear in his hand. Suddenly, without any warning at all, that dark spirit takes full control. Saul hurls the spear with lethal force, attempting to literally pin David to the wall. But David is incredibly quick. He dodges the strike. The heavy spear drives deep into the wall, right where David had just been sitting. Realizing the oath is completely broken and his life is in immediate danger, David flees into the night, making a desperate escape from the palace.
And that brings us to Michal's quick-thinking, 4-step plot to save her husband's life. See, Saul doesn't just let David run away. He sends armed men to David's own house to watch the doors and assassinate him the moment he steps out in the morning. But Michal, David's wife and, mind you, Saul's own daughter, discovers the plot. She urgently warns David, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you're going to be killed." So under the cover of darkness, she helps him escape by lowering him down through a window, completely bypassing the guards at the door. Then, to buy him time, she crafts this masterful decoy. She takes an idol, places it under the covers of David's bed, wraps it in a garment, and even puts a patch of goat's hair at the head to mimic David's dark hair in the dim light of the bedroom. It's brilliant.
So morning comes. Saul's men knock on the door demanding David. Michal coolly tells them he's ill. The men report back to Saul, who is so consumed by rage at this point that he orders them back, saying, "Bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." The assassins force their way into the room, rip back the covers, and discover the dummy, just the idol and the goat hair. When Saul realizes he's been tricked by his own daughter, he furiously confronts Michal, demanding, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away?" To protect herself from Saul's terrifying wrath, Michal lies. She claims that David threatened her life, saying he forced her to help him escape. It is a tense, desperate moment of survival for literally everyone involved.
Which leads us perfectly to part 3, Sanctuary Among the Prophets. Having fled his home, David needs a refuge where Saul's political and military power can't easily reach him. So where does he go? He runs to the one man in Israel who holds ultimate spiritual authority, the very man who originally anointed both Saul and David, the prophet Samuel. David travels to Ramah and just pours out his heart, telling Samuel everything Saul has done. Recognizing the severe danger, Samuel takes David and they go to dwell together in a place called Naioth.
Now, to clearly understand where we are, Naioth isn't just a regular town. The word itself suggests a specific dwelling or encampment. This is a sacred, communal space where groups of prophets lived, studied, and worshiped together right under the leadership of Samuel himself. By retreating to Naioth, David is seeking the ultimate asylum. He's placing himself directly under the umbrella of God's prophets, creating a situation where Saul will have to directly assault a holy community if he wants to get to him.
What word inevitably reaches Saul that David is hiding at Naioth and Ramah, so Saul immediately dispatches a group of armed men to capture him. Notice how the timeline of events here tracks an escalating miraculous intervention. The first group of heavily armed messengers arrive at Naioth. They see the company of prophets prophesying, with the great prophet Samuel standing right there at their head. But before they can even draw sword, the Spirit of God powerfully comes upon Saul's men, and they too begin to prophesy. They are completely incapacitated from doing any harm. Saul hears about this and sends a second group of men, and the exact same thing happens. Stubbornly, Saul sends a third group of assassins. Once again, the Spirit of God overtakes them, and they join in prophesying. God continuously overtakes and neutralizes every single group of assassins Saul sends.
Furious and honestly out of options, Saul finally decides, "Fine, I'll go myself." He travels to the great cistern at Siku, demands to know where David and Samuel are, and marches toward Naioth. But Saul doesn't even make it to the camp before the Spirit of God hits him too. He walks along prophesying until he reaches Naioth, and the experience is so overwhelming that it physically strips him of his dignity and royal power. He actually strips off his royal robes and lies naked in Samuel's presence all that day and all that night, utterly helpless. This stunning display of a murderous king being forced into ecstatic submission gave birth to the famous proverb, "Is Saul also among the prophets?"
All right, let's pause for part 4, clarifications and key ideas. Let's dig into some of the terms we just saw. First up, you might be wondering, what exactly are teraphim? The text says Michal placed an idol, in Hebrew, a teraphim, in the bed. These were household idols, pretty common in the ancient Near East, often kept for family protection or inheritance purposes. While they were later strictly condemned in Israelite religion, their presence here shows they were still lingering in some households. But more practically for our story, these idols were sometimes large, roughly human-shaped objects. We need to know this to understand exactly how Michal created a convincing enough dummy to fool the royal guards who were just looking through a dimly lit room from the doorway. It provided just the right amount of bulk under the blankets. Second, what does the text actually mean when it says Saul and his men were prophesying? In this specific context, prophesying isn't about predicting the future or giving some profound sermon. It describes an ecstatic, trance-like state brought on directly by the Spirit of God. It's an overwhelming, immobilizing divine experience that completely strips a person of their normal bodily functions and intentions. God essentially used this spiritual overload as a literal defense mechanism. It physically stopped Saul's men and eventually saw himself dead in their tracks. It turned agents of murder into completely helpless instruments of divine worship.
Moving on to part 5, practical life lessons. What can we actually take away from all this?
Well, these points clearly highlight some incredible life skills.
First, the absolute value of a loyal friend. Jonathan literally risked his own royal standing to protect an innocent man. Second, the courage of speaking truth to power. Jonathan used logic and calm reasoning to momentarily break through his father's blinding rage. Third, recognizing toxic situations. When Saul threw that spear the second time, David didn't stick around to talk it out. He knew the environment was lethal and he had to get out of there. Fourth, resourcefulness in crises. Michal didn't panic. She engineered a brilliant step-by-step escape under immense pressure. And finally, faith in God's ultimate protection. When David ran out of earthly options and human allies, the Spirit of God stepped in to provide a sanctuary that swords simply could not penetrate. These are all just absolutely essential tools for navigating life's worst storms.
And that brings us to Part 6, Chapter Recap.
The entire chapter can be understood perfectly through these three distinct, escalating escapes that David makes from Saul's relentless jealousy. First, David escapes the spontaneous danger of the spear in the royal court, relying purely on his own quick reflexes. Second, he escapes the premeditated danger of the assassins at his house, relying on Michal's window strategy and that clever decoy. And third, he escapes the institutional, state-sponsored capture at Naioth, relying completely on the miraculous intervention of God's Spirit. So, from relying on himself, to his wife, to his God, David survives the whole ordeal.
So I'll leave you with this question. When human efforts fail, how does divine intervention reshape our most desperate moments? Think deeply about how Saul had all the military power here. He had the troops, the weapons, and the total royal authority. He relentlessly pursued his target, yet, despite all his earthly power, he ended up lying completely helpless and stripped on the ground when confronted by a spiritual authority greater than himself. It really asks us to reflect on where ultimate power truly resides when the walls are closing in on us.
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.